All right, we kind of alluded to it in a couple of stories, but we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at a report that was released this week that does not paint Okta in a good light. The latest breach of Okta, the big one that everybody's talking about that's had such massive fallout, it appears to have been caused by an employee doing something they shouldn't have. Now, for those of you who don't know, the biggest part that was released in this report was that Okta had a bunch of their session tokens from their customers stolen. The number of tokens was actually relatively low compared to the number of customers that Okta has. It was around 144 tokens. However, the problem is that it was found because a Google or an employee logged in to their personal Google account on their corporate laptop and saved the username and password in that browser. And the attackers were able to effectively compromise that account and then use that to be able to get into Okta systems and steal these tokens. And that is actually being blamed on a lot of other attacks that have been going on. People have been using these tokens to be able to get into other people's systems and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's gotten to the point where Okta's stock is starting to go down because it's really starting to affect the way that people have faith in an identity management system. Now, Brian, being someone who's very tuned into the security world, I mean, what does this say about Okta's own internal controls, and what should people kind of be looking at to prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I don't know their internal controls super well, so I don't want to judge whether they didn't have the right ones or the right ones failed. Because just like we talked about with Cloudflare, sometimes things just go sideways in unpredictable ways. You can't cover every single base. It's a little bit of a testament to that is the fact that we've had so many cybersecurity companies have issues. Okta has had a run lately. We've seen LastPass in the past. Cloudflare, obviously, not security issues in Cloudflare's case, but they've gotten swept up in this Okta thing now too. It's got notes of trust your providers. The chain of custody type thing. Who all has your data and how are they treating it? All get swept up into this. It's a huge story of lessons learned as well from the security side, similar to the way Cloudflare was on the resiliency side of things. But yeah, I mean, not logging into personal stuff, not saving passwords into the browser, is a big one that is part of my personal thing. Like, no, browser, stop asking me. I have someplace even better to save that. Are all good lessons learned here that shouldn't have been happening. Um, you know, those of us that have been around for a while remember carrying two pagers or a cell phone and a pager or two cell phones, depending on, one was our personal, one was for work. And, for whatever reason back then we didn't mix the two. That kind of went away with smartphones and the ability to have separate apps, but I think we're starting to come back to the other side on that, where a lot of us do carry two laptops. One is our personal laptop if we want to do our personal email. One is the work laptop for doing things like logging into customer support portals and where all the crown jewels are held. So a lot of good lessons learned in this one. Things we should and shouldn't be doing, and also notes of lots of other elements in there too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really kind of driving this point home is not that we're dealing with sophisticated attacks. I mean, this was kind of pretty basic. It's that our systems are trying to help us in ways that are actually not that helpful. And one of the things that I'll actually go back to is Google Authenticator. It's actually, a lot of people use it as like a gold standard for doing authentication for two-factor stuff. I mean, we finally admitted that getting a one-time code texted to you is probably a bad thing. But Google actually compromised their authentication system without even realizing it by allowing you to upload your authentication tokens to the cloud so that you can sync them down to other devices. On the surface, great idea, right? I don't have to worry about making sure that everything is synced up or using only one device, except in this particular case, if you have access to someone's Google account, you have access to all their authentication tokens too, and you can impersonate them. So in the interest of making people's lives easier, you've actually made people's lives harder. Let's go all the way back to the 80s, and I'm going to pick out two movies in particular, War Games and Superman 3. Do you guys remember that those two things have something in common where they're trying to launch a missile and they have two keys that are given to two different people, and they have to put them into two locks on opposite sides of a console that are 10 feet apart, and you have to turn them both at the same time. Now everyone's like, oh, that's just good security. Because you're just making sure that both of them agree. No, you're making sure that no one person can make a decision that requires authentication to make it happen. Like, the reason why both of those things are so far away is because you both have to turn them at the same time, and you physically cannot do that unless you're Wilt Chamberlain. For those of you who are too old to remember, he was a really tall basket player with really long arms. But you've got to be able to separate those things, and I get it. Part of what we do with security is we want to overcome the challenges of this. I am almost positive that Okta employee knew that logging into their personal Gmail account on their work laptop was a bad idea. I also am willing to bet, and I don't know this for sure, they probably needed to check something really quick that someone had accidentally emailed to them, or it was just a real quick pop in, grab it, and get out. Security is not always maliciously evil. Sometimes it's accidentally evil. We know we're not supposed to do those things. I mean, how many times have we seen people accidentally paste an AWS API key into GitHub code, and then it got violated and hijacked within seconds? Like, there are literally bots that scrape GitHub looking for API keys. Like we know that happens, and we're training ourselves to be better about it. But it only goes so far. And that was one of the things, is if you read through the press release that Okta had when they announced what was going on, like, they've tried to minimize this. Oh, we have 18,000 customers and only 144 of these tokens were stolen. That's like less than 1%. I would argue it's more than zero. Like, if you are one of the 17,856 customers who's not affected, big deal. But what if you're not? And that's where they really need to do a better job of kind of hammering this home. Every exception should be treated as if it's a major problem. We're going to do our best to remediate this. We're going to make sure that we put controls in place. Like, one of the things that Okta said is, well, we weren't doing a very good job of monitoring what was happening when people were accessing those tokens. Like, that should be a big deal. Like, you should not just be able to get access to something simply because you want it. Like, there should be other controls in place. We're not going to allow you to download this unless we've authenticated this request with an authorized user, like the chief security officer or something like that. And the reason for that is because those kinds of controls, that kind of two-step authentication, not plug in a code from my phone, but make sure somebody else knows what's going on, that is a better way to prevent this, because you're involving the brain of another human who's sitting there going, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right about this.
Yeah. And you touched on the observability aspect of things, which is, know what's going on in your environment. This thing sat in their environment for over 14 days. They were dwelling for quite a while, which is, one of the major things in security is you got to detect fast so you can respond fast. It's amazing that it wasn't a larger blast radius, quite honestly. That was plenty of time to exfiltrate a lot more data. And maybe they have it. It's possible. But, Okta admitted, their major failure was, one, not, allowing their employees to log into personal accounts, but then secondarily, the fact that they had a blind spot within their system. Apparently there was multiple ways that a user could access this information that they took, these tokens. One path was well alerted and observed. The other one, not as much. This makes one wonder, the threat actors in this scenario, whoever did this, did they have some inside knowledge of that? Did they know that they took a path that would allow them to hide longer? That's gotta raise some big concerns for Okta, hopefully, that they're digging into to figure out how they would know that, because maybe they were lucky. Maybe it was a 50-50 chance and they rolled a critical hit on that, but odds are usually not the case in that regard. So, it's a lesson in the entire NIST cybersecurity framework to some extent. You've got to have the proper protections. You got to have the proper detections as well. And detecting it is critical in these situations. And again, a cybersecurity company that doesn't have those proper controls, doesn't have the proper observability in place is a little bit off-putting, to be honest.
Exactly, and this is a saga that's going to continue to go on. And while we wait for Okta to figure out how to calculate THACO properly, we will definitely be bringing you more news